Well, good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is the BRN Sunday podcast. I'll be joined today by members of the media, academia, and financial services as we analyze all the news in retirement, markets, technology, personal finance, and so much more. We've got a great show for you, so sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of the BRN Sunday podcast. Let's kick things off with a look at technology, and joining me on the line is Daniel Klein. He's lead advisor and executive producer for Seven Investing. Dan, thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jeff.
It's always a pleasure talking with you, and we always love the great stories that you bring, tech stories that you bring to the shows, I should say. So, what's top of mind this week?
So, Jeff, it's going to be a tough next couple of months because I like gadgets. I like stuff. And there are a lot of gadgets coming out in the next few months.
Awesome.
So, as we head into the holiday season, it's early in the morning for me to be talking. Starting October 13th, we get a cavalcade of new items coming out. Now, that's also the day that Apple's going to announce the new iPhone. We've talked about this before. All we sort of know is that there's going to be multiple models. They're going to be 5G, but you're not going to be able to buy them on October 13th. What you can buy on October 13th is the new Oculus Quest 2. Now, I have the original Oculus Quest. This is a virtual reality headset. Jeff, and it's both cool and super useless. So you put the headset on.
Sorry.
I think it was $399. You put the headset on, and you could play such exciting games as Virtual Hand Glider or Pretend I'm Riding a Roller Coaster. And this is fun, but it's not particularly useful. The next version of this, which costs $100 less, it's $299, promises to be lighter weight and a little bit more useful. Better graphics. Maybe it won't give you a headache if you try to watch a basketball game on it. That said, this is fun technology, but if you're going to spend $299, I'd save it for the new Xbox. I'd save it for the new PlayStation 5. I think virtual reality, as cool as it is to play with for 10 minutes, it's not there. But on that same day, you're going to get the Microsoft Surface Laptop Go. That's basically just a cheaper version of the Microsoft Surface laptop. And the Microsoft Surface laptop, which was over $1,000, is one of my favorite laptop profiles. It's just a really cool device. So this isn't as highly powered, but it's a good solution, especially for the millions of students who are at home, working on school. For $549, this is not a bad deal. On October 15th, we're going to get a new Roku Player. This is a $99 device. It's going to make launching channels faster. Jeff, one of the frustrations when you're bringing out your Roku, when you're using any of your streaming devices, is you hit the button and then it takes 15 seconds for Netflix to load. That's not going to be the case with this device. How much better it is, they say it's 50% faster. I don't know. I haven't tried it yet, but I am encouraged.
Wow.
Jeff, are you tired yet, or have we gone through too many of these?
No, this is amazing, and I'm assuming this is all for holiday shopping. We're past back to school, and I'm just wondering how, Dan, you try everything out, so I just want to make sure you're saving money too.
So here's the thing. We just bought my son a laptop. I just bought my wife a new laptop. And I personally, I ended up with a new iMac, which runs my studio when I'm in the office. So we are computered out in my house. So as much as I want the new Surface Go, not going to get that. What I am going to get, which comes out around this time, is my son and I will get the new Xbox. He's an avid Xbox player. And because we're already a Microsoft subscriber, to use their sort of new hardware as a service model, we'll add to our subscription and get the slimmed down version of the new Xbox, which is interesting because it doesn't have a drive. So there'll be no more going to GameStop to buy a game. Everything we buy will be digital. So yeah, it's a really exciting time. Later in October, we get a new Apple iPad Air. Again, I don't need that. I already have I already have my iPad. We're going to get redesigned Echo devices. Instead of the cone, they're going to be more of a spherical shape. Now, that's not a big deal, but we've got Prime Day coming up October 13th and 14th. That's almost always the best time to buy Amazon devices. So, Jeff, if you like technology, this is going to be an amazing season.
Well, I do love technology, but I'm just worried about spending gobs and gobs of money on something. Like the VR glasses, Dan, that just seems like nice technology, nice to have, but
Yeah, no,
that's something. Sorry,
here's,
go ahead.
here's the thing. Don't buy those. And the other thing, as much as I like technology, I'm a big fan of look at last year's model. Like, I really like the Surface laptop, and I've often joked, yep, it came out a couple years ago. I'll go buy one 2 years from now when you can buy it at a heavy discount. We have a Microsoft Surface. I think it's generation 3 or 4,
Hmm.
and I bought it on Woot for a heavily discounted price. As new stuff comes out, look for deals on the old stuff. Now, the problem is right now, when it comes to laptops, there aren't a lot of deals because every laptop available, it seems, has been snapped up. When I needed to buy a laptop for my son, I looked at the 10 best laptops under $500, and I bought the only one that was in stock on Amazon. So, we are in a tricky situation, but in general, if you're really interested in the VR headset, maybe buy last year's model for half the price rather than buying the newest one.
Yeah, especially if it's only lighter, and maybe it's a little bit better. Dan, another cute story I think you wanted to cover was the International Space Station gets a refrigerator, and I got to think that they have a refrigerator already, right? I mean, because you have to keep things cool in order to eat them. But tell, what did we learn
Yeah,
here?
so apparently they didn't. Apparently they were eating all of their like food out of squeeze bottles, and I often joked that astronaut technology stopped in like 1978
Hmm.
with the freeze dried ice cream, which you could still buy at Disney World or any space tourism location,
Yeah,
and it kind of had. So these new refrigerators, which are about the size of a microwave, they deal with the special problem that in space, in no gravity, that heat doesn't rise. So you're running a refrigerator that causes heat. That heat sits on the refrigerator and eventually causes it to overheat. So a team figured this out, and now we're actually sending refrigerators to the International Space
that's
Station
cool.
so they can store fresh food and also food that they grow hydroponically on the space station. So it sounds like it's a minor thing, but if eventually we're going to colonize other planets, and I fully believe in the science fiction vision of we have to go to the stars, if we're going to do that, well, we need refrigeration, and this solves that problem for those long journeys.
Yeah, that's. I think it's kind of neat because you and I both grew up in the '70s. I'm a little bit older than you are, and I remember going to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington D.C. and trying some of that squeezed ice cream.
Yeah,
And
you get the like styrofoamy ice cream, and like it only comes in the strawberry vanilla chocolate. You don't get to pick any exotic flavors. And so this is a team, and we should credit them. It's at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I love when you see scientists, when you see business, when you see uh, institutes of higher learning solving actual problems. Like there's a lot of theoretical things science can do, but this is reality. Like at some point, we're going to send a spaceship to Mars, and that spaceship is going to need fresh food. It's going to need to keep medicines cool. It's going to need to use cooling for experiments. So we've long had teams working on the space toilet. Now we have teams working on space refrigeration.
and so when's the space shower gonna come around, Dan? Can you even do a space shower? Maybe you
I,
can't.
they,
You
they,
can't
they,
simulate gravity, can you?
yeah, they do a space shower, but it's in like a bag. Like I've never, I mean, I can't say I've taken a space shower, but I'm pretty sure there is a concept of a space shower.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to seeing that, and when they can generate artificial gravity like they did in what was it, the movie Passengers? Remember they had like the
Yeah, I
sorry, go ahead.
think that technology exists. I think that movie was actually based on the reality of how you would do it. And probably you will have area. Frankly, if you don't have areas on a ship that's going to be in transit for years that have gravity, you're going to be so physically deteriorated by the time you get there that there's going to be a problem, even if you're on a planet with less gravity. So I do think there will be that sort of spinning mechanism to create gravity. I like that movie a lot, actually.
Yeah, it was a good movie, really good movie, good graphics, but also CGI, but also a really good story. Sometimes which is lacking in today's high tech movies. Dan, always a pleasure chatting with you, and I'm looking forward to catching up again on Tuesday on the network. So we'll see you then.
Jeff, I'll see you Tuesday.
Bye. Welcome back. Now, time to talk healthcare. Joining me on the line, she is the healthcare editor for Business Insider, Ms. Lydia Ramsey. Hi, Lydia. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure. The pleasure is all ours. So, What's top of mind? Oh, I should have said, and I forgot to say, Lydia is also the editor of Dispense, which is a collaboration of or a aggregation of all the news in healthcare each and every week, which of course you can find on the Business Insider platform. So now I said that, Lydia, what's top of mind for you and the team at BI this week?
Definitely. I think like most of the country, a lot of our attention was paid to, what was going on with the president and his COVID-19 diagnosis. We heard early Friday morning, I guess, that he had been diagnosed, and shortly thereafter he was in the hospital. So it was a week of tracking what treatments he's been taking, and then later on, parsing through videos he posted kind of exclaiming how happy he was about some of the treatments he received. So it's definitely been an interesting week to be a healthcare reporter.
Yeah. So what, I can't say that I understand all the knowledge about remdesivir, if I get that right, and some of the other, but what does this mean overall? The fact that, we're not privy to the president's medical records, of course, but what does this mean in terms of what you and I have talked about over and over, which is that vaccine? Does this show that we're getting closer, that there are therapeutics that can help you? Is this a good sign?
Yeah, so it's kind of tricky like that. The president got a number of different treatments as part of his stay at the hospital and then his discharge. So he got the antiviral remdesivir. He got a steroid called dexamethasone that's proven to be pretty successful in helping COVID-19 patients who are hospitalized. And he got a new experimental treatment called antibody drugs. And you might know antibody-based drugs. They're usually used in anti-inflammatory conditions. They're the kind of the commercials you see on TV. It's that kind of platform of not being a pill and a little different. But these are especially formulated to basically prime the body's immune system with antibodies that the body would otherwise make. So they're based on the proteins that people who've survived COVID kind of produced. And so when Trump got that, it's still experimental, so we don't totally know, exactly how well they work. We've gotten some limited data suggesting they work. Trump, for his part, claimed that it was the thing that, got him really healthy. He called it scary, a bunch of promotion for it. But, it's still kind of hard to know exactly if that was the reason he got better.
Yeah. And when you look at, let's go back to the vaccines that you and I have talked about at length on both here and on the network, the Moderna, the Pfizer. Any update there with regards to some of the trials? I know some things were put aside because there were some side effects, but are you hearing anything about those things being solved and moving forward again with testing?
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is where, antibody drugs are a really interesting component of the conversation because they're kind of seen as a stopgap between us and eventually getting vaccines. So basically, Pfizer is still on board with kind of its timeline of having really conclusive evidence by the end of the month. We'll see how that goes. Moderna says they'll probably have the data the FDA is looking for by the end of November. Those will be the kind of first two to come out the gate. We saw AstraZeneca have some hiccups, I guess that would have been back in September, early September. And it's to my knowledge, the U.S. trial for that vaccine hasn't restarted. So it's kind of pushing that timeline back. But what's going to be interesting is, the FDA is kind of coming out in support of more evidence, more safety data that the Trump administration is kind of pushing against. Obviously, they want a shot by the election. But these new guidelines asking for about 2 months of safety data kind of pushed back that timeline, right? We saw these trials get started in July, and obviously people have been enrolling since. So to get that 2 months worth of data, it's going to take a little bit longer than November 3rd.
Yeah, it seems like it. And obviously all of us are waiting on bated breath. If the president can get infected and those around him can get infected, and he is tested regularly, right? Then that just shows that none of us are immune to getting sick, and why social distancing is still and wearing a mask are still important protocols to be practiced, even if in when we do get a vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're probably not going to experience any kind of mask learning celebrations where we get to throw it all away. But, it's a good reminder, especially as we start to see places like New York start to tick up again, that it's important to keep vigilant. It's not like the virus has changed all that much in the past 6 months or 7 months. So it's important to stay following as much of the safety protocols as we can that we picked up back in like March and April.
Absolutely. Well, Lydia, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for your perspective on what's happening with the vaccine, a little bit on how the president is getting better, and we look forward to having you back on the network very soon. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Welcome back. Now, time to take a look at some of the hottest social media trends when it comes to finance. Joining me on the line, Devin Banerjee is Senior Financial Services Editor for LinkedIn, and he's also the editor of the This Week in Finance newsletter, which, of course, you can find on the LinkedIn platform. Just got to find Devin's name. Devin, thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Absolutely, Jeff. Good to talk with you.
Always a pleasure, and I always say this, but I'm going to say it again. We really appreciate you doing double duty, first on the network and then coming on the podcast, which is recorded every Friday. So, Devin, what's top of mind for you and the team at LinkedIn this week?
Yeah, Jeff, another busy week on the platform, some interesting conversations. I'm going to start with one about the role of fintech platforms in the Paycheck Protection Program loan disbursements. Now, this is based on some excellent reporting by Michelle Davis over at Bloomberg. If you go back to the beginning of this pandemic, Jeff, and the start of the PPP program, you'll remember that's the program run by the Department of the Treasury and the Small Business Administration, doling out loans to small businesses. If you remember, the authorized lenders were really only large banks at the time. And those large banks really just prioritized existing customers, businesses with an existing banking relationship. And that left a lot of other small businesses out in the cold trying to access this program. Fast forward, and a bunch of fintech platforms eventually got approved to take part in arranging those loans. So these are companies like Cabbage, for example, Blue Vine, and others. Now, fast forward to today, and what Bloomberg found, and Michelle over at Bloomberg found, is that although they processed just 15% of PPP loans, the fintech companies were responsible for about 75% of the loans that they approved that have now been found to have been fraudulent by the U.S. Department of Justice. So these are fraudulent borrowers, people seeking to scam the system by faking the information they input and trying to get some of that PPP money. So the story here really is that, that need for speed and that, that benefit that a lot of the fintech platforms really touted, which is that they can be quicker in diligencing these loans and arranging them, really turned out to turn around and bite them. Now, it's important to note that borrower fraud doesn't automatically mean that these fintech platforms broke the rules of the program or are legally at fault. But as Bloomberg notes, in many cases, a simple Google or state records search would have found that some of these applicants' businesses didn't exist or their businesses were dormant. So a really interesting take on the fintech ecosystem here, and also just a kind of autopsy, if you will, on how that whole PPP program went.
I like how you phrase it, autopsy, because I don't know, it just has some weird connotation in my head, made me laugh. But look, I think the problem, the lesson here is that, yes, we needed to get money in the hands of businesses. We were shuttering the economy. There's got to be better protocols in place to validate the information that you're suggesting. But the fintech aspect of this worked really well. They're agile, and the ability to execute just is illustrative of that whole community of businesses.
I totally agree. And I should really, it's important to point out that the volume of fraudulent loans Let me just find that figure, Jeff. It was only about $175 million in alleged fraud, and that's out of about $525 billion in the loans approved through the PPP program. So we're not talking about widespread fraud here. It's also important to note some of these fintech companies like Cabbage and Blue Vine did respond to Michelle in the Bloomberg story, noting how many checks they have in place. Also noting that between approving the loans and the money actually being dispersed, which is not captured in that data that Bloomberg looked at, there are a lot of additional checks in place before the money actually goes out. So yes, to your point, these companies are able to move much faster. They are more accessible to many of those small businesses that, as I said earlier, were left out in the cold because they did not have big banking relationships.
Yep, and that's important. And the other thing, Devin, that we're going to talk about later on in the upcoming week is about the unbanked and people not having access, individuals not having access to banking relationships, having to do things like payday loans. That's not necessarily symptomatic of what we're talking about, but still, having access to capital allows you as a business or allows you as an individual to build something, either for yourself personally or as a family, that can stand the test of time. You need access to capital, and look, I'm not gonna cast stones. I think it was the best possible solution in a very challenging time, but we can always do things better. We can always do things better.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's certainly why this reporting is important. It's not casting blame or alleged legal misdeeds, but just figuring out how this can be done better again next time. Yep. So shifting gears a little bit, Jeff, we are LinkedIn. We're always looking at how the workforce is doing during this time. So recently in our latest Workforce Insights piece by my colleague George Anders, we took a look over the past couple of months at signs of burnout. And what we're finding here is that, of course, well, maybe not of course, but I think a lot of people this will resonate with, signs of burnout are steeply on the rise. So we partnered with Glint, which is actually a company we own, which does employee engagement surveys. Looked at about 1.75 million employee engagement surveys this year, and we're finding that about 5.5% of employees are, instead of just filling out the bubbles on their survey, they're free form adding comments about burnout. They're talking about feeling exhausted or feeling ineffective, feeling disconnected from work. So that 5.5% is up from actually under 4% just in February before this pandemic hit. So a jump of about 1.5 percentage points or 33% on an absolute basis. And a couple of lessons to take away here that George did some reporting on. The first is that number one, good career opportunities really help prevent burnout. Now that sounds obvious and it's hard for companies to do, but when people, when it's possible to advance in turbulent times, people take notice. Of course, number two, good work-life balance. That's so important for managers and for companies to be promoting. Number three, good communication. People feel less burnt out. They feel more connected, of course, when there's more consistent and more human or personable communication coming from managers and their companies. Number four, strong company culture, something that they can connect with, with their own personal values. They can translate that into their work. Team collaboration. Number six, learning and growth opportunities. When people feel like their company or their work cares about them, wants them to learn, wants them to advance. It's very important. Number seven, clear action on employee feedback. A lot of people, we've gone through review cycles now since this pandemic has started, and very clear feedback, proactive feedback about how people can do better at work, how they can advance. That's very, very important to preventing burnout.
That is, I got to say, I think people are doing a lot more. I would say there's probably, if people are being honest with themselves, they're doing whatever they can to hold on. And think about those parents out there, Devin, who have to do double, triple duty, manage the home, be a spouse, help virtually teach a child and do work. I mean, that is just symptomatic. Right there is like 3, 4 jobs, hard jobs, not easy jobs. People certainly going to be burned out. I'm worried more about the mental stress of people, they're having to get through this. And
Yeah.
and even if you have means, if you have some emergency savings, you're a little bit better off. You still have stress, but you don't have that financial stress. But what about those people who were furloughed, lost their job, had their amount of salary reduced, don't have any salary at all? There's a lot of mental stress there. That's something that I think is often overlooked.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, that 5.5% of respondents talking about these comments, I mean, that is not uniform across all workers. You're absolutely right, Jeff, that women in particular, people who have been furloughed, people who have a family member furloughed or laid off, I mean, they're across the spectrum, along the spectrum, there are some people really, really hurting out there and are entirely burned out. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, Devin, as we're talking about this, it's Friday afternoon. We're hearing signs that there could be a stimulus package in the works. First it was off, then it was on, then it was off. Now it might be on again. Hopefully there'll be some level of relief. I think they're talking about $1,200 checks, maybe extension of unemployment. That could really go, and also, by the way, extending rent, not rent forgiveness, but prevention of eviction, things for both landlords and renters. That could go a long way to staving off some of that duress and mental issues as well.
Absolutely, Jeff. Yeah, as we're recording this, it's just after 1 p.m. Eastern on Friday, but President Trump is showing signs of coming back to the table, raising his total offer to about $1.8 trillion. That's less than the $2.2 trillion that the Democratic bill, had included. But there are signs, Jeff. There are positive signs right now as we're recording this.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to keep our fingers crossed. Maybe we'll have some news by the end of the show. Who knows? If not, by the time people watch this or listen to this on Sunday, maybe there'll be some news and some passage. We can only hope. Devin Banerjee, always a pleasure chatting with you both on the network and the podcast. Have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy some time off, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Take care, Jeff. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Perfection is perfected, so I'm let them understand from a young G's perspective.
Welcome back. There's so much going on in markets. We had the president being diagnosed with COVID-19. Now he's back. We've got a potential for a fiscal stimulus bill. Who can help break this all down? Oliver Renick from the TD Ameritrade Network is with us this morning.
Yo.
Oliver, thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
I threw a lot onto your you already have a lot on your shoulders with running 2 shows and being the lead anchor for a great network. But always come to you and your friend Kevin Kelly to kind of break things down. Do you mind just giving us a snapshot of what has happened this week? It's about 1:20 Eastern time as we're talking on a Friday. And so we can't be responsible for what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 hours. But what have you seen this week on the program?
So there's definitely a lot in flux right now, and the market is back to some really interesting levels. So when that happens and we kind of put extra weight onto things, it's sort of like someone who watches a stock and they find moves on big volume to be particularly notable. That's kind of the way I approach stock market moves and market moves when they happen at important technical junctures, because if you look at, say, the dollar, which has been weakening over the last 6 months, now weakening again on the potential for more stimulus to come into the economy. If that happens and pushes the dollar through important areas to the downside, then the market is saying this is a really big event. So that's kind of first the setup on the technical basis that we are seeing that the market is suggesting this particular event we're waiting for, a stimulus package, is a big deal, at least for the short to intermediate term. Then you have in the background, of course, the currents that generally are blowing towards a Democratic victory in election on November. But at the same time, with so much short term, it's very hard to kind of figure out what the market is preparing for beyond a month from here. There's an argument that stimulus will come more easily at the hands of a Democrat-led Congress and White House and sweep, et cetera, and Senate. There's also, though, just kind of a more broad case to be made that in doing so, you're essentially betting on regime change, and the regime that has been very bullish for stocks over the last 4 years, obviously, is something to keep in mind. So all of these kind of big picture electorate things are a little bit nebulous and difficult to tie causality to short-term market moves. However, I don't think we really need to necessarily. The market right now has a short-term event in front of it, and we're trying to understand what that means. That short-term event is some kind of fiscal injection to keep the economy together while we've had economic data plateau and slow down. As far as investors are concerned, to me, the phrasing that we need to approach the stimulus with is it enough and is it as obviously stock market positive as the monetary stimulus that we had for a long time? So we're kind of making this handoff, right, where the Fed has been able to backstop the economy and the market for a long time, and they're saying that they're done basically for now. They're not done, but they're really stepping away and kind of letting the car go on a steady cruise control. It's a good speed, but it's still cruise control. So any acceleration has to come from the fiscal side. So if we envision that kind of passing of the baton, the question that I'm trying to figure out, and I think investors have to ask themselves, is what fiscal impulse is going to be as market positive as broad monetary support? And that becomes a really interesting question because it means that not all stimulus is the same. Certain size deals are going to have a different impact on markets, certain industries targeted, certain amounts of money maybe, and that's where we're going to see the interesting things in this market as they kind of break apart and go their own way, possibly.
You know, it's interesting, Oliver, when last week, the president, this time last week, he had a COVID diagnosis, and you saw the market just kind of go down. And then there were some really unknowns, and now he seems to be better all of a sudden. But also he had kind of pulled back from this fiscal stimulus. Now things are back on. It just is very interesting to watch as a layperson, and I'm sure for our audience, kind of watching this and saying, wow, is it really just one issue or one item that is really driving the market? And I think probably the simple answer is no. There's a multitude of things that go into market moves, right? I mean, it's not just, yes, the president has a role to play in governing the country, but so does Congress. So do things that happen with different companies, different sectors. All that kind of is baked together that really results in the market activity that we see.
That is, I think, a good thing to bring up, which is the kind of vacillation, the back and forth on the president's support for fiscal stimulus, also combined with his illness too, because we had moves around his illness that seemed to indicate that that uncertainty was not good for markets. So that also kind of throws into loop a little bit the prognostications about what a long-term 4-year change might mean. And then if you kind of really get into the nitty-gritty, as the president first said that he didn't want there to be more stimulus talks, the market went down despite Biden's numbers actually jumping up at that point. Biden's odds jumped like 4% or 4 points in betting markets as the president tweeted that, and the market went down. So the logic there is that if the market were bullish purely because it thinks there's going to be a Democratic sweep, well, that doesn't really fit because then it would have rallied as Biden's odds were cemented. So clearly there's a short-term need that the market has for stimulus. But as we also know, then the president reversed and said, well, I'm going to give you stimulus after I win. Biden says he's going to give stimulus after he wins. The market's kind of like assuming it's going to get something no matter what.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, also, it's important to keep in mind we've had good developments from Eli Lilly, Regeneron, and Gilead. All of their treatments continue to be more and more advanced and better. And that should be also market positive, specifically, though, within the companies that need the economy to reopen. So you've had more strength in those reopening and economically sensitive areas this week than you did just pure tech. But tech still works, so you got everything in the right direction.
Yeah. I think last week I used the Grateful Dead quote, when life looks like Easy Street, there is danger at your door. I think this time I'm going to say, what a long, strange trip it's been, Oliver. Oliver Renick, a pleasure chatting with you. Best of luck on markets on the close today, and we will catch up with you again very soon. Have a great weekend.
Cool, thank you.
Bye-bye.
perfection is perfected, so I'ma let them understand. From a young G's perspective.
Welcome back. Now time to talk real estate. And joining us on the line from Dow Jones Market Watch, Mr. Jacob Passy. Jacob, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Glad to be here.
Always a pleasure talking with you. And there's so much going on with markets and the economy, but you're our go-to for real estate. What's top of mind for you this week?
Yeah, so first off, want to talk mortgage rates, as you and I often do.
Mm-hmm.
So this week, mortgage rates kind of stayed flat, which was a bit of a surprise and might, point to what we can expect from interest rates moving forward. So mortgage rates are, the average rate for a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, according to Freddie Mac, is now around 2.87%. So that's 1 basis point above the record low. So still in this crazy low territory. But analysts, going into, ahead of that report, which was released on Thursday, had anticipated rates would drop by more than that. For a number of reasons. Mainly, there's been so much chaos over the past week since you and I last spoke. President Trump was diagnosed with COVID,
Yep.
And then was hospitalized, and then suggested that he was abandoning negotiations with congressional Democrats for a stimulus package. And now he's saying that the negotiations are back on, and lots has gone on. He canceled his appearance in the next debate. So much has gone on. But in spite of all that, interest rates kind of stayed the same, and that's surprising because amidst all this chaos, the stock markets on equities markets dropped on Friday in response to the news of his diagnosis, and they rebounded since then. But in all this volatility, a lot of investors fled to the safety of bonds, and so typically, when that happens, it causes a change in the Treasury yields, which did rise. And when the Treasury yield moves, you typically expect mortgage rates to move. That's generally how it goes. They don't track exactly the same, but they roughly follow each other because like the 10-year Treasury is a long-term bond, and because mortgage rates are long-term loans, they kind of follow that. Are based on long-term loans, they kind of follow that trajectory. So that didn't happen this week, which suggests there is a bit of a breakdown, which has been going on throughout the pandemic. There's been kind of a breakdown in that relationship. They're not moving in lockstep like they used to. But, experts kind of said that this suggests that the mortgage market might have kind of reached its limit. There's a potential right now that we might not see rates go lower than they are now, which, let's be real, they are already, incredibly low.
Yep.
But, there is this possibility now floating out there that this might be the floor on rates.
So, Jacob, last week we talked about the home builders index, if I recall correctly. What does this do, if anything, in terms of moving the needle for or against people looking to buy a home? As you said, mortgage rates are so low, and even if they have kind of flattened a little bit, this is probably still a good time to get a mortgage. But will the housing inventory keep up?
Right. So buyers in the market right now, we're certainly helped a lot by low rates. I don't want to act like, that what's going on now is, a complete tragedy for buyers. It's not. This is probably the best time ever to get a mortgage if you can get one. The key question there is if you can get one. Availability of credit is still pretty tight. Lenders, and that's pretty typical. When rates go down, it is typical that lenders then will, become more stingy on who they loan to because they don't have to, they can be, picky then, as opposed to an environment where rates are higher, so there's less demand from, folks looking to get a mortgage. When the rates are as low as they are now, they get their pick of the litter, basically. So, they can be stingier, they can, expect higher, down payments, they can expect, folks to have less debt, pre-existing debt, they can expect folks to have higher income, things like that. So,
Jake,
it's harder. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought. I'm sorry.
No. And so, all of that as a result means it's harder to get a mortgage right now. And now if we're talking about a realm in which, rates are no longer falling anymore, I mean, then we start getting back into this territory that we've been in for, quite some time now, where home prices are very expensive and low rates allow home prices to continue going upward. And throughout this pandemic, home prices have continued to rise pretty significantly. And in some parts of the country, the Midwest is seeing, record home price appreciation. And that's, a region of the country that's typically, more affordable. So when we're looking at this kind of big picture, the low rates are certainly helping people afford to buy a home. And we're not, home prices would need to jump a lot to, negate the drop in rates we've seen over the past, year, basically. But, home prices are still rising, and as they continue to rise, even if rates stay the same, that's making it less and less affordable to buy.
Last question, Jacob. You mentioned kind of all the ups and downs of the market with the president contracting COVID, dealing with that, but then you mentioned the fiscal stimulus. What does that mean, whether it's on or off? I guess it's back on again. Does this mean anything at all for renters, home buyers, landlords, etc.? Is anything baked into that potential stimulus deal if and when it happens again?
Yeah, definitely. It's, the stimulus package is very consequential for the real estate industry. So, a lot of it will depend on what we see happen. And like I said, the Trump administration says they've settled on, an offer that they're going, like a counter offer to basically the offer House Democrats made in the, revised bill that they passed in the past week. So they passed basically a smaller version of the HEROES Act that they passed early in the summer, which was kind of a follow-up to the CARES Act. And so the House Democrats legislation had around $50 billion set aside for emergency rental assistance. The Trump administration has not released their plan yet, so we don't know, what they may or may not have proposed. They've said that their plan is a $1.8 trillion plan, whereas the House Democrats' plan, I believe, was over $2.2 trillion. So there is a difference there, and whether that difference is rental assistance or not remains to be seen. Experts say we need around at least $100 billion in emergency rental assistance if we're going to avoid a major catastrophe in the rental market. So right now, as listeners probably know, there is a nationwide moratorium on evictions that was put in place by the CDC. It doesn't apply to folks automatically. If you're a renter, you have to basically opt into it. You have to tell your landlord that you cannot afford to pay the rent because of the economic conditions surrounding the pandemic, and you have to meet certain other requirements. But if you opt into it, you're protected through the end of the year. You cannot be evicted by your landlord through the end of the year. Now, what that means for both parties is, for renters, that's all good and well. They have somewhere safe to live through, January, through the beginning of January. But come January 1st, if they've not, made up what they've missed in rent payments, unless the moratorium is extended, their landlord can then evict them. And the flip side of this is, basically that extra length of time, buffer that renters are now being given. Basically, the rental industry is saying, well, hey, you're basically forcing the landlords to shoulder all the responsibility for the stability of the rental industry right now. There's been no extra assistance passed with this eviction moratorium. The Trump administration solution that they put forth at that time was basically to make use of leftover funds from the CARES Act, which is certainly helpful, but is not covering the full breadth of assistance that we need. So, two things could happen come January 1st if we don't see emergency rental assistance passed as part of a stimulus package. First off, you'll see probably a wave of evictions. All those folks will be displaced. They may become homeless in the winter months. That could actually cause the pandemic to get worse because if they're living in shelters or living, in crowded apartments with 10 other family members or what have you, it's much more likely that we could see transmission increased. And the other thing that we could see is some landlords facing foreclosure. We could see landlords selling their rental units, which, depending on who they sell them to, they may stay rental units or they might, not. And that could, make rents go up. So a number of factors going on right now. And, we'll see what happens. Mitch McConnell has said that he does not expect a stimulus package to pass in the next few weeks before the election. So a lot hinging on whatever comes out of that plan, but hopefully there will be rental assistance included, and hopefully they'll include it in such a fashion that it's easily accessible.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed, Jacob. Great. Wow, we talked about mortgage rates and home prices and fiscal stimulus. What a great segment. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon or this morning. Actually, it's technically afternoon, but the show airs all morning. We appreciate it. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we will talk to you again very soon.
Yeah, talk to you. Take care.
Bye. Welcome back. Now time to talk retirement. Joining us on the line, she is Dow Jones Market Watch's retirement reporter, Ms. Alessandra Melito. Allie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Friday's going well, and the weekend's shaping up to be pretty nice. But before we get to the weekend, I always love talking to you about what is new on the retirement front. So take us through it. What's top of mind for you and the team this week?
Yeah, so Market Watch came out with a new series. Well, not a new series, but a new package for a series called Best New Ideas. And in this one, I wrote a story about baby bonds and a proposal to help the retirement crisis come to an end. So, as we know, a lot of Americans are not prepared for retirement, and a lot of them lean on Social Security. So this proposal would complement Social Security, but it could also potentially replace Social Security if, the program ceases to exist. So in it, I spoke with a financial advisor. He's well known. He even has a commercial, Rick Edelman, and he has a podcast, very, very well known in the industry. And he came up with this proposal for the government to create a new type of bond that investors would fund, and it would act like a Series EE bond. And basically, you'd put like $7,500 in it at birth, at a child's birth, and it would grow over time so that when the child became of retirement age, and it would also kind of follow Social Security's footsteps and be like a full retirement age index. When they got to that retirement age, they would have about equal to what they would get from Social Security. So for an average American who maybe didn't save enough for retirement, didn't have 401k, or had a 401k and couldn't afford to max it out, this could be a nice little addition to help them, live comfortably and with dignity in retirement. So I spoke with a few experts, about what they thought of this, and it was a fun piece to write.
So, when I read the piece, and I, obviously, big fan of Rick Edelman's, one of the challenges that you and I have talked about, and others have talked about with Social Security, is it's unfunded. I mean, it's just funded through its pay-go. So as money comes into the Treasury, money goes out. It sounds like by issuing a bond, it's actually funded, which would alleviate probably one of the biggest issues around Social Security. Yeah.
And his proposal, so there are a few versions of, baby bonds isn't the technical term for it, but there are a few proposals out there about baby bonds, one of which came from New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. And they're, those versions, they talk about, the government funding this program. But in Edelman's program, it would just be another investment fund, similar to when people use municipal bonds. There are various reasons why someone might invest in one over another, and there are ones that are tied to different projects. So it would be like that. And he said that, it's extra beneficial for the government because they're not the ones who are, putting the money up front. It's just an investment. So that would definitely help. And
as we see with Social Security, right now it's teeter-tottering on, like, nobody knows what to do with it or how to fix it because it's running out of money. So, that's a nice addition to this proposal.
And in any sense, I mean, you mentioned Senator Booker out of New Jersey. Any sense, and this is obviously an election year, so a lot of people have lots of ideas. We really haven't heard too much from either of the presidential candidates about saving and retirement. There have been a lot of other issues when you can kind of break through the screaming at each other. But any sense for whether or not this is a possibility that gets picked up in the next Congress come January of this year, or is this just an idea that kind of will get resurrected at some point when a new retirement legislation vehicle comes up?
Honestly, I have no idea. I never know what to expect out of Congress or.
Well, they don't either. You're on the same page. You're on the same page with the Congress. You're on the same page with all of us when it comes to Congress.
I have a feeling nobody's going to talk about Social Security for a while, even well after Election Day, just because like that's always been the third rail of politics, so they say. And I've spoken to other people about this in the past. They say, like, as far as Social Security is concerned, they're probably going to wait until it gets a little closer to insolvency. And as far as these sorts of proposals, I never know. Like, I wish I did, but I never know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I was just kind of, it was more of a, just kind of asking in jest, because as you know, lots of things get thrown around, especially in an election year. But in general, there's lots of ideas, and they have to attach themselves. What I've learned from the Legal Eagles on their segment is things have to attach themselves to a certain bill that then has to find its way out of committee to the full House, go to the Senate, and then go to the president, and then oftentimes can be very lengthy. But I have to say that I do love the ingenuity, and Rick has been someone who's been in the industry for a long time. He's been a pioneer in so many ways when it comes to passive investing, how to treat investors right, how to service your client right. So maybe it's something where he has the power to advocate a little bit more, talk to some of the influential senators and Congress people, and say, hey, let's get this thing moving, because I love the fact that it's not pay go, it's funded, and I think a lot of Americans would be on board with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Allie, really appreciate you coming on the program. Really interesting, and I'm looking forward to my baby bond. Though I don't have a baby, I've got 2 cat babies that could easily use some support, maybe for some food when I pass on into the netherworld. Pleasure talking with you. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll catch up with you again next week.
Yeah, talk to you soon.
Bye, Allie. Welcome back, and now we're going to check in with our Legal Eagles, and we have just one Eagle today. Joining me on the line is Kevin Walsh. He's a principal with Groom Law Group, an employee benefits law firm based in Washington, D.C. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me on, Jeff. I think it's always good to close the week out with a conversation with you, even if David's not here this week.
Absolutely, and we appreciate you guys making time. So I know this week you wanted to talk about preemption and Erisa versus state law. A lot of very top of mind given what's happening at the Supreme Court level this week. What say you and the Eagles?
Oh my gosh, it's a super wonky topic, and I'll try to stay de-wonky on it. But it's an important topic because if you're a plan service provider, if you're a plan fiduciary, if you're a plan participant, you want to comply with the law, and part of complying with the law is understanding what law applies. And I mean, I think we all know that in the retirement space, kind of the king of the hill is the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, ERISA. So complex federal statute regulates basically all aspects of, plan design and administration for retirement plans and health plans. So one question that comes up is, if I'm a plan fiduciary or if I'm a plan service provider, do I just look to ERISA? Or do I also have to look to state and local laws that may regulate different things. And this week we have kind of two cases that are ongoing that provide some color on when you have to look to state laws and when Erisa gets to say, it doesn't matter what anybody else says because it's a federal statute and everything else gets wiped from the slate. Mm-hmm. So kind of the first case here, and it's interesting because we tend to think that Erisa preempts state law for purposes of, basically all aspects of plan administration. And what we saw this week was a decision on a motion to dismiss in a case involving Abbott Labs. And in that case, a plan participant had $260,000 stolen from her account. Wow. By a cyber criminal who appears to have hacked her email and appears to have, used the information gathered there to, one, get more information out of the record keeper, and then two, ultimately wire the money from the participant's account to an account that they maintained.
Wow. And
what's interesting here is not that, there's ERISA issues when money gets stolen from a participant, but the participant alleged that the record keeper violated Illinois' kind of consumer protection laws. And that, the record keeper said, we've got great cybersecurity, we've protected your assets. And the court in Illinois, is allowing the state law claims to go forward, essentially saying that, the advertising on, how robust your protections are, the systems you have in place to protect, they're not really regulated by ERISA. So ERISA doesn't clear the slate on those state laws. Mm-hmm. It's going to be interesting to see how this case progresses because, anytime there's a crack in preemption, it does two things. One, it makes compliance tough because most plans are operated at a national level. And when service providers have to look to each state, it makes things very difficult for them because then they have to, have different practices depending on where people are. It can drive up costs. It also kind of creates some risk that, we could see more claims brought in some states than others. And that's one of the fears that having a nationwide statute was designed to address. On the other hand, it's important to recognize that ERISA doesn't regulate everything. So this case could help define the edges of where ERISA applies and where state laws get to creep in.
Yeah. Go ahead,
go
Kev.
on.
No, go ahead.
No, chime in. This is a good time to chime in.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, from my perspective, not being an attorney, the privacy issue should people who are listening to this should just wake up and think, how do I continue to be vigilant in protecting my information? Because I don't yet know the facts of what happened and how. Did she give erroneous information to somebody? How did someone get that information? So this is a time to be very vigilant. That's the only thing I wanted to say, Kevin.
No, that's a great point. If you're an individual, protecting your information should probably be something that, if you protect your information, it makes it tougher for cyber criminals to take your identity. The other case, and this one I'm not going to talk as much about, but it was argued at the Supreme Court on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. It asks essentially, so a state stepped in and decided it was going to regulate essentially how much intermediaries could charge for providing services to a plan or to provide services generally, but those services are typically offered to a plan. So the state law, so a state tried to regulate this, and what's going on now is the intermediary doesn't like being told what it can charge, mm-hmm. and it's challenging that can a state regulate how much a service provider can charge for its services when those services are plan related, and that's now up at the Supreme Court, and that's a very interesting question. We see it, in terms of drug pricing now, but you could see it coming up in other areas where, any dollar that a plan spends or any dollar that a participant's charged is a dollar less for either kind of the medical benefit they can get, the quality of the care, or a dollar less for how much they have in retirement. So if states can regulate that, you could see this being an area where they would seek to regulate. On the other hand, Erisa is designed to provide a national framework, and this could be a complex area where, each state getting in on the game would cause more problems than it would solve. So the Supreme Court's kind of struggling with the question of, does that type of price control, price regulation for services that tend to be bought by plans but may not be exclusively bought by plans, can states regulate that when it's in the context of a plan? And these are issues that, I like Erisa because I typically have to worry just about federal law. Mm-hmm. I think plans in general like it. But on the other hand, some participants may feel like, their state is a lot closer to them. They know where they live. They know their state legislators better than they know their federal regulators and federal legislators. So it's a balancing act between local needs, federal needs, and then trying to have a coherent framework for regulation.
Yeah, all good points, Kevin. I think a lot of people are going to be watching this, people who are sponsoring retirement plans, people who are participants. Thank you so much for appearing on the program this morning. Give our best to David. Enjoy the rest of your week and the rest of your weekend, and we will talk to you again next week.
Thanks, Jeff. Looking forward to it. Bye.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the BRN Sunday podcast. I want to thank you, our audience, for stopping by. So glad you could. Hope you found this entertaining and educational at the same time. Don't forget, we're back again tomorrow morning on BRN AM. I'll be joined by the Dallas Morning News' Natalie Walters. Talk about not-for-profits. You're not going to want to miss it. So until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.